All right, let's just jump right in. I want you to picture a world that was so sure of itself, so confident in its own future, that it genuinely believed it had cracked the code for human perfection. That was the feeling at the end of the 19th century. But then came the 20th century. And it was a period of such violent, shocking change that it didn't just redraw the map, it totally unraveled our whole understanding of progress, of reality, and even of what it means to be human.
And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of it. On one side, you have this incredible, optimistic promise that science was the key to making humanity better, healthier, happier. And on the other side, the brutal, horrifying truth of what actually happened. Science became the key to perfecting destruction. That single, stark contrast, that's the whole story we're going to unpack.
So to really appreciate just how deep this fall was, we first have to understand the incredible heights they were starting from. We're beginning in an era that didn't just think progress was possible. It thought it was absolutely inevitable.
I mean, for a couple hundred years, you had this scientific revolution and the Enlightenment building up this amazing momentum. And the thinking, it made a lot of sense. If we can use logic and reason to figure out the laws of physics, well, why can't we use that same logic to fix society? Things like poverty, disease, war, they weren't seen as permanent flaws, but just problems. Problems that were waiting for a smart, scientific solution. It was a time of just incredible, almost bulletproof optimism. And then all of that optimism ran headfirst, full speed, into the muddy, bloody trenches of the First World War. And this wasn't just another war. This was the event that took all those utopian dreams and twisted them into a global nightmare.
And this is where you see the dark reflection of every great innovation. Chemistry, this amazing science of creating new things, was turned on its head to create agonizing weapons like chlorine and mustard gas. Engineering, the science of making things work better and faster, was perfected into the machine gun, a machine built for killing on an industrial scale. And even medicine, the most noble science of all, got twisted. Its breakthroughs were used to patch soldiers up just enough so they could be sent right back into the meat grinder.
And that really drives home the central, awful lesson of the whole thing. The war laid bare this terrifying truth that our technology could get smarter, our machines could get faster, and our weapons could get more powerful, but our wisdom and morality weren't keeping up. The Great War was the horrifying proof that just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. But the shocks weren't just happening on the battlefield. Believe it or not, at the exact same time, the world of science, the very foundation of all that 19th century certainty, it started to crumble from the inside out. The fundamental rules of the universe were being torn up and rewritten.
See, for centuries, we all lived in Isaac Newton's universe. It was comforting, right? It was like a giant predictable clock. If you knew where the gears started, you could predict exactly where they'd end up. Everything was absolute. And then this guy named Albert Einstein comes along and basically says, yeah, about that, it's all relative. Suddenly, time and space weren't fixed things anymore. They could stretch and shrink depending on who was looking. The solid ground of reality suddenly felt like it was turning into quicksand.
And Einstein wasn't working alone. There was this whole intellectual wrecking crew out there tearing down the old world. In Germany, you had Werner Heisenberg, who showed that on a tiny subatomic level, the universe has built-in limits to what we can ever know for sure. And then in Vienna, Sigmund Freud was doing to the human mind what Einstein was doing to the universe. He argued that we aren't these rational, logical beings at all. Instead, we're driven by these dark, irrational, unconscious desires that we can't even control.
Let's just sit with Heisenberg's idea for a second, because it's a real mind-bender. Think about it. The very act of looking at something changes it. It means you can never, ever know everything about it with perfect certainty. It baked uncertainty right into the heart of science itself. The universe wasn't a perfect clock anymore. It was more like a cloud of possibilities. And with that, certainty was officially dead.
And here's the kicker. These weren't just weird ideas for physicists to debate in the lab. They perfectly mirrored what everyone was feeling. Just as the old empires and social rules were collapsing out in the world, the old scientific certainties were collapsing too. It felt like everything, everywhere, was coming loose.
So, if the world is in chaos and reality itself is up for grabs, how do you even begin to process that? Well, one way is through art. And you can see this profound sense of being adrift etched into all the literature and art of the time.
This famous line from the writer Gertrude Stein just nailed it. She was talking to the young people who'd survived the war, a whole generation that felt completely cut off from the past.
All those old ideas their parents believed in, heroism, duty, honor, hadn't just been challenged, they had been blown to smithereens in the trenches. They were lost.
And you see it all over their work. Writers like Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, they just threw out the old rulebook. They stopped writing about noble heroes on grand quests. Instead, they wrote about broken people, feeling alienated and confused. They totally broke away from the polite, moralistic stories of the 19th century and just showed life as it now felt, fragmented, cynical, and brutally real.
But here's the twist. In the middle of all this wreckage and disillusionment, something else was happening, something completely unexpected. The very nature of this total war, where it wasn't just armies fighting, but entire nations, started to crack the foundations of the old social order, and it especially changed things for women. With millions of men gone to the front lines, society had no choice. It had to adapt. And so women poured into roles that had been closed to them for centuries. They were nurses and administrators with the military. They became the backbone of the entire wartime economy, building the planes, the shells, the whole war machine. And for the first time, millions of women got a taste of economic independence and a life outside the home. And that was a genie you just couldn't put back in the bottle.
This massive contribution to the war effort just gave unstoppable momentum to the fight for women's rights. I mean, the old arguments against it started to sound ridiculous. How can you tell a woman she is capable of building a tank, but not capable of casting a vote? And while the fight was still long and hard, the war was, without a doubt, the turning point. It massively sped up the movement for suffrage all across the Western world.
So here's the really interesting takeaway. In all the rubble of that old, rigid world, an opportunity was created. The same catastrophe that killed the old faith in inevitable progress also helped shatter the old patriarchal system, and in doing so, it actually helped pave the way for a more democratic society to emerge from the ashes.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. The people living a little over 100 years ago were absolutely convinced their world was built on the solid rock of science, reason, and progress. And they were dead wrong. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the unshakable beliefs we hold today? And which of them are maybe just one crisis away from shattering into a million pieces?